So I'm sitting here on a call, and all of a sudden upstairs I hear this commotion, and it's just it. First, it's just a little bit of bumping around, and then it turns into pandemonium. And I know it's the Roomba. So my wife's out of town. She's on a business trip, and this Roomba's going off, and I'm on the middle of the call. I go upstairs, and I see the Roomba. It's dragging stuff all over the place because with these Roombas, like, you've gotta do a little bit of pre-work ahead of time.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
There's some planning.
like yeah, yeah, you can't have a bunch of clutter on the floor. You gotta make sure that the trap is cleaned out and everything, and, for some people, there's not a lot of planning involved. I've got 3 young kids, so there is a lot of planning involved,
Yeah.
because there's typically a lot of clutter. There's things all over the floor. And none of that has transpired because, again, my wife is out of town. She's the one that has the Roomba app. She's the one who sets the schedule. She's the only one that can control the Roomba. I don't have the app. I can't do anything with it. And what
She's like the architect. She's like the architect of the, environment. She knows what's going on with it. She's got all the enabling technologies in it,
yep.
and you're just
She's
a
in
passenger.
typically, yeah, because I work downstairs in the basement. The Roomba doesn't
Yeah,
affect me.
there you go.
Um, but I again, I don't know the Roomba schedule. So this thing just turns on, and I don't have any of the chairs moved out from under the table, like, the kitchen table. So it's gonna get stuck under there, and by the time I get up there and see it, I've got, like, it's discovered a couple goldfish crackers, that my two-year-old has left on the floor, and it's got those things all crunched up, and they're spread all over the floor. The trap hasn't been cleaned out, and so it's not actually picking anything up. All it's doing is creating a bigger mess than there was to begin with. I'm trying to hit the button to make it stop, and it's just beeping at me and basically telling me to buzz off like it's not listening to anything I've got to say. And I can't I can't do anything about this because she's in complete control and she's not here. She's, 1,000 miles away, in another state on a business trip. And, it's one of those situations where if we had thought about this ahead of time, like, we probably could have avoided this entire situation, but we didn't. And now I'm stuck with the Roomba dragging goldfish crackers and hair ties and everything else all over the floor, banging into stuff, making a huge racket, and I can't get it to stop while I'm on the middle of a conference call.
I was gonna say, what
Trying
situation? Yeah,
yeah, trying to pay attention, trying to, eh, trying to, not necessarily lead, but at least participate in this conference call, and it's chaos.
yeah,
Be best laid plans, best of intentions, just not fully thought through, particularly not, when you have the primary caretaker of the Roomba, away from home.
yeah. You know, it makes me think of, like, when we go on vacation when we're working, right, and we leave the office, and that we quickly determine how mature our model is, our daily working model that we're operating under. We quickly understand what our maturity level is around this, right? Because when we're working and we leave the office, how many times are people reaching out to us when we're gone, or how many things are getting backed up when we come back and we find out things weren't moving and going out, things weren't moving forward. And, you and I were having a conversation one time about CMMI and this whole idea of maturity models as it applies. And we were joking about how that really kind of applies to us as individuals. And we kind of that all comes to bear when we go on vacation or we leave the office. Our schedule changes and all of a sudden we're not there. And all those dependencies that everybody's built up on us or we've built up on ourselves for things to get done quickly get exposed. Because now all of a sudden when we're not there, it's like, wow, how does this get done? Well, Nick here to do that, or Matt's here to do that. It's like all of a sudden you realize that maybe your maturity model for yourself and your work isn't quite as high as you want. And we joked about the Roomba because we joked about this Roomba concept because it's like, where's the documentation at, right? That's level one.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, you look at it and it's, one of the I think it's level 1 or level 2 is, highly dependent on individuals. Some documentation present. And that's typically where I live. Like, there's some documentation, but it's highly dependent on individuals to push things through the finish line because it's not all proceduralized. You don't have the processes, communicated and understood quite as well as you should. And you're exactly right. Then all of a sudden you go to the office for a few days and it all gets exposed.
Feeling stuck in your career? Like you're not reaching your full potential? At Greenbox U, we help you unlock the hidden potential within your career journey. Our Digital Foundations for Success course, combined with personalized coaching, equips you with the tools and strategies to discover, monetize, and apply your unique skills, knowledge, and experiences. Don't just meet expectations, exceed them.
You and I have both been in situations where we've been managing people and managing leading groups of people, you know? So if you're sitting out there and maybe you're not in a leadership position yet or you don't have experience with that, here we'll give you a couple insights from a kind of a leader's perspective on what happens when people aren't prepared and they go on vacation. So our direct reports, when we've had those direct reports in the past, they're taken off and gone on vacation and their documentation's not in very good shape. It's their maturity model they're operating under is not very high, and it gets exposed when they walk out the door. You have any experiences like that?
Yeah, and typically what I think happens is they're just not looking ahead. Um, like you can do simple things like just look at the schedule, or look at the calendar and say like these are things that are coming up that I know have to get done. Um, and then make sure that you communicate. Almost all these problems center around communication
Yeah.
and and making sure that everyone kind of knows what the expectations are. Everybody understands what needs to happen, who needs to do it, when it needs to happen. And a lot of times, if people aren't in leadership positions, they're not used to having to be the one to lead that communication. And so, as a leader, one of the things that you can do is you can have that conversation with them ahead of time to make sure that your expectations are clear, that now they are going to be the ones who are setting expectations and providing clarity around what needs to happen while they're out of the office.
With this podcast, if we can share things that, like, let's see, are out there, and you have ambition, you're a success oriented professional, you want to be in maybe leadership position someday, maybe not. Regardless, you're just interested in doing a better job, and you're just interested in improving. One of the things that we want to do in this podcast, I think, is share some tips and insights. So this, even though you and I spent decades in management positions and leadership positions, there's also the other side of the coin, which is we want to share some insights with people that aren't necessarily in those positions to help them improve, right? So it's great if you can pick up, if you're a listener to what we're talking about and you go, wow, you know what, maybe I don't do a good job when I'm heading out for vacation. Maybe my documentation isn't great. And rather than your manager having to ask you to do something or improve in this particular area, listen to what we're saying and suggesting. Maybe you get some ideas and insights here where you go, you know what, I can easily make that adjustment, make that change. Because flipping back around again, when you're in that leadership position or your manager's position, when you just proactively start doing stuff, I don't know how you feel about this, but I've always felt like I'm just so much more satisfied with how my unit is operating when people are just taking the responsibility and taking this kind of proactive stance to improving things versus me having to say things.
One of the things that I've always struggled with is sometimes when you're in it, like when you're looking at your own work, like you get this tunnel vision and all you're looking at is, like here's the expected output or here's the goal that I need to get to. And you have a hard time kind of taking that, 10,000-foot view of, well, what's the best way to go about this? It's really easy to sit on the sidelines and critique other people and their processes because you can see it clear. You're not emotionally invested in it or not as emotionally invested. And you don't, you're not necessarily as focused on the work and the process itself because you're not the one doing it. And so if you're looking at things that you would encourage other people to do, and a lot of times you can come up with great ideas for what other people should do and for the ways that other people should tackle problems. Take a step back and ask yourself whether you're doing those same things.
Yeah,
Or maybe even better yet, where can I do those same things?
right.
Um, and then try to identify those things that you can do in your life or in your day-to-day work because it's going to do nothing but improve your output. It's going to improve your ability to push things through the finish line. It's going to improve your productivity. And at least for me, when I'm working better, I'm typically happier.
Yeah, yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. I really like that. It makes me think of kind of, I don't know, were you an athlete? Did you play any sports growing up?
Not well.
Okay.
But I did my best.
You tried, right? So one of the yeah. So one of the things I like to think about is like why if you're participating in sports, why are you practicing? Right? You're practicing so that when you get to some competitive moment that you're able to it's, that when it counts, quote unquote, right? When the scores are kept or whatever the sport is, right? This is the idea that you perform at the highest level possible. And that's your practice. And it doesn't matter what the sport is, right? Your practice is all in preparation for that. So I think we the same thing with musical instruments when you're learning how to play something, that practice is so important because, I believe in this concept of deliberate practice that when you're doing something repetitively with intent behind it, that you start to adopt it as kind of a normal it just becomes normalized for you. It's because something that you just really understand and it's kind of inherent. Um, and so I like to think of professional development the same way as I do like practicing for a sport or playing a musical instrument or something like that, in the sense that there's a lot of time when we don't have to be on, quote unquote, on, that we're not really engaging with other people, that we're working or we're in times when we're not talking to other people and interacting with them. I like to think of those times as if we have an idea about what we're trying to accomplish and get better at, we use those times for for those practice sessions. So how do I start to envision my own success or envision the use of some new tool or method or something that's going to help me improve? How do I do that when I'm just by myself?
I'm doing it just for me. Nobody else is going to look at this. Maybe that's true. But it's having the discipline to do that. And yeah, I don't know if you ever have like read or watched any of Jocko Willink's material.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Jocko has a saying that discipline equals freedom,
Yeah.
and that by having the discipline to go through these things and to do all this work on the front end, it eliminates all this ambiguity and doubt on the back end, and now you're free to do the things that you want to do. So by having that discipline, you've given yourself this freedom.
Yeah, it's almost like a systems mentality. I mean, if you view things as, and I think you're similar to the way I look at things too, based on our conversations over time. You kind of look at things, okay, what's my method or what's my system for this? And so when you think that way, it's much easier to repeat, right, your performance or repeat results. Things become more predictable. And I think that's all about practicing. It's all about discipline. It's all about taking on new techniques, learning how to do new things and applying them to the work that you're doing. So I totally agree with that statement. I think that's exactly what we have to be doing. And so there's a lot of dead time when we just show up places and just like blend into the background, right? Well, I'm being paid to do this job or do this thing or know this thing. And I apply it and I do a fairly good job with it. But there's working at that level and then there's working at higher levels, right? Where you're actually contributing in a different way. So it's noticeable to other people that when you show up for a meeting, you're prepared.
Mhm.
Or that when you're going on vacation, your preparation for leaving for vacation is not like anybody else's. There's good conversations with your leader, there's good conversations with your coworkers. People feel like, wow, Nick's going out on vacation, but man, I clearly understand where all Nick's projects are at. I know who's backfilling for Nick. I know who we're supposed to go to if this comes up. I think if we work with that goal, the room is a great example, right? It's like, when people leave the environment and there's still something behind that's still functioning and working and still has to, you know, operate. Who's left back behind to be able to pick that up and go, "Oh, yeah, I know exactly where the Roomba app's at. I know exactly what the schedule is. I know exactly what some of these things are." Not to pick on the, owner and operator of the Roomba at all here, but that's just the idea is that, if we apply that kind of situation in our work, and I think when we start to think that way, we're demonstrating this to other people who will see that and see that we are functioning and performing at a very different level, and I
100%.
just
And
yeah.
there's also the saying that a rising tide lifts all ships.
Sure.
And so if you're raising your game and people see that, you know, this is how Matt comes to these meetings. This is Matt comes prepared every time. then the other people are more likely to come prepared every time as well. If you come in and you're just winging it every time, then that's gonna get recognized and people are gonna think that's the expectation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, and how many times I kinda use this in my coaching business with people, I tell them it's like, how many times you get invited to that Friday afternoon, that late Friday meeting where somebody hasn't done a great job of defining the agenda, and you're maybe kinda scratching your head going, "Why exactly am I in this thing?" I really encourage people, I actually challenge people on this to just to take every one of those as an opportunity to see the opportunity that could potentially exist in it. It could be that it's a throwaway meeting, that there's nothing of any value, and it could be, right? But don't go in with the default position that that's what's happening. Go into default position. It's like, I got invited for a reason, and because I got invited, right? I owe it to myself and the other people I'm working with to try to understand how I can help. And there potentially is an opportunity for me to take my skills, knowledge, and experiences and apply them here to really help someone else, right? And if you start to stack those experiences on top of each other, people start to notice that because they're like the person who maybe had a kind of a loose agenda defined. The next time they invite you to, they up their game. To your point, right? You know, rising tide lifts all boats, right? It's the same concept. Is that you are modeling behavior for other people to see, and I don't care if you're function at an entry level position in an organization or you've been in you're a highly successful, accomplished person that's been someplace for a really long time and have a lot of responsibility. It's the same concept, right? People will derive confidence from others when they see people have things figured out, right? Just to simply state it. And so the more you have figured out, right, the better off you are, and the better off other people are.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've really struggled with there, um, just a moment of vulnerability
Yeah.
is, you know, you wanna do these things every time. You wanna be your best all the time, and then when you're not, and you know it, you feel like you failed.
Yeah.
Um, and that's really, really challenging, and one of the things that has really helped me over the years, and, you know, it's helped my performance, and it's probably more than anything, it's helped my mental health, is understanding that, you're not gonna be 100% all the time. And, just because you wanted to have this outcome and you wanted to be your best, just because you weren't, that's okay. Recognize that, hey, what? These 3 times today I was. Now I know that these other 2 times I wasn't, but these 3 times I was.
Yeah.
And, and forgive yourself for when you weren't.
Think back to maybe something from 4 or 5 years ago that really, like, that you were working on and kept you up at night, right? That you were really like, "Geez, this is, like, going really badly," or, "I don't I might get walked out of this place if this fails." We all have kind of those moments. And now
I know exactly what it was. I think of it instantly. It was, I was managing a project to get a bank in compliance with the Secure Act of 2020.
okay.
And
So yeah.
that uh, it was during, President Trump's first term. He signed this bill into law, I wanna say somewhere around, like, December 21st of 2019, and it went into effect on January 1 of 2020. And so we were made aware of this right before it went into law, um, and we had virtually no time to prepare. It was a big shock, with legislation. It was ambiguous as far as what the requirements actually were and when you
Mhm.
had to comply, and I was stressed out of my mind because it that this just I was a project manager, and this just got dumped on my lap. Here's this, you need to figure out how to, you know, like, spin up a project to get this entire bank in compliance with this. When does
Mhm.
it due? We don't know, but here you go, have fun.
So this is 2019, you said?
Yeah, December 2019. I found out about it, like, 2 days before Christmas.
Okay, so how many times have you thought about that? How many times have you lost sleep over that particular event in the last, I don't know, 4.5 years?
0.
Right. And the idea behind this is at the moment, it seems like it's do or die. It's gonna, Jesus is gonna make me or break me kind of thing. I got to do this. If I fail, what happens, right? And you lose sleep, and it disrupts your life, and there's all kinds of things that you just take on a lot. That's like a heavy burden, right? But now you can probably hardly remember it. There's aspects of it you can remember, obviously, like kind of the overarching deadline and kind of what was happening with it. But as far as the ins and the outs and the conversations and the specifics around it, we typically memory hole that stuff because it becomes irrelevant over time. We get moved past it and we move on, right? So we can take certain lessons from it, sure. But as far as the pain and the kind of the all the stress that was associated with it, we typically move past that fairly quickly and move on. So the point is, I guess, is that when we look at things in the rear view like that, and we have a new one that happens, it's good to understand. It's like, I'll get through this. I'll make it through this. It'll get resolution. I'll be okay. And I won't ultimately probably even really remember this thing in 4 or 5 years from now.
Yep. It's amazing how quickly the biggest or most important thing in your life right now becomes a 2-minute topic on a podcast a couple years later.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. It's exactly right. You're just living and dying with something, and you're like, you know what I find, Nick, why this happens? Because I used to do this a lot, right? Before I had my own business and I worked in corporate environments, I used to feel this way a lot. I mean, especially like I'd get to like Sunday night and I'd be like thinking about the week, work week, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, there's landmines all over the place. I'm super stressed out about everything. So I went back and I kind of, and again, just looked backwards on this after I started coaching people. And I started looking back because I found like everybody has this, most people have this problem. And I started to realize that the key with it is, and I had that problem when I was an entrepreneur, but it was kind of different when started my own business, right? Same kind of feelings, same kinds of thoughts. I went, okay, well, I can kind of understand as an entrepreneur because kind of everything starts and stops with me and what I'm doing. That makes sense. Okay, I got a high degree of emotional investment in here. But wait a minute, maybe my level of emotional investment was off when I was working for other people. And maybe it should have never been as high as it was, and I was over investing emotionally in everything that I was doing, and that's what was causing a lot of my stress and kind of this suffering almost I was putting myself through on a weekly basis with some of this stuff. Because then, not like to your point, you get on the other side of it after a certain amount of time, you just kind of forget about it, right? It becomes a quick talking point in a podcast or something, right? But at the time, it doesn't feel that way. The only thing I can come up with as far as an explanation is just I was over invested emotionally in the environment I was in. I didn't own it. That wasn't my company. It wasn't my corporation. Right? I just felt like I gotta go in here and do a great job, but I'm just gonna emotionally invest at this particular level, and I just, like, had no ceiling to that, or seemingly. I just would just keep investing emotionally where I get wrapped around the axle of it all. I don't know if that resonates with you or not.
Oh, it 100% does. And at some point in time, like, you have to recognize, like, what you can control and what you can't. And like stoicism is really kind of wrapped around that idea of, you know, recognizing what you're in control of versus anything that's outside of your span of control or even your influence. And doing your best to inform and influence and guide the things that you are in direct control of and letting go of everything else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, that's way easier said than done. Um, in fact, I struggle with it all the time. But
Sure.
if you can at least get yourself in the habit of taking a step back and trying to identify these things that you are in control of versus the things that you're never going to have control of, then you can at least identify a little bit more. Like, this is worth getting stressed out about because I can do better. I can do something about this. And
Yeah.
these are the things that aren't worth getting stressed out about because what happens here is it's out of my control.
Well, and I really think it's you and I've spent what? I mean, I've spent 30 plus years in information technology field, right? And, so when you think about it collectively, there's decades that we've spent in that world, right? I think it's really easy for this to happen in that world. And what I mean by that is with technologies that are changing all the time and new functionalities, new capabilities, new things happening, even rev level changes or dot upgrade changes in a software, life cycle. When new capability, new functionality comes, that's awesome because there's new things that can be done with it. But there's the whole new set of challenges about, okay, well, how is this going to impact our environment? What are we supposed to do with this? How does it work? It's just like the levels of complexity just escalate very quickly, I've found. A lot of times I think, that because it's constantly moving, we're not in a situation where we're working in a profession where it's very static, right? That things aren't changing really quickly. Things are just very, kind of stagnant, and we typically know the knowledge set that we have to deal with to solve problems. Technology world's different because there's constantly changes and updates and upgrades and new advancements happening all the time, that the ground that you're standing on shifts a lot. I was having this conversation the other day with somebody. I can remember, it doesn't seem like that long ago. I mean, I guess depending on the age of the listener to this, right? It might seem like a long time ago, but I can remember I worked in an environment where we probably had 15 or 20 full-time Microsoft Exchange administrators. I mean, this was their job. I mean, round the clock, right? I mean, these folks were on call. I mean, it was a full team of people built out, right? And so what you're living and dying with as an exchange administrator in the year 2000, right? You just look at how much has changed in that space right now. Look at things
Mhm.
like, you know, cloud and hosted email and all these different things that have come about, right? The orchestration tools, provisioning tools, all the advancements that's taken place. And now you're in a situation where that landscape has shifted so much that, there aren't a lot of exchange administrators sitting around, that we don't have huge teams of those people anymore, right? So all those people had to adjust, they had to move on. I'm sure at the time they felt like this is life or death. I got to make sure that the mail system works and everything's great. Only to see, like, within a couple of decades, right, virtually that responsibility that that person a full-time job around is gone.
Here, probably 2 weeks ago, I was talking to somebody, and they were, uh, they were talking about one of their first roles in IT, like, and so this guy, he's nearing retirement now, and, he was a COBOL programmer,
Yeah.
and he made the analogy. He said, "Back in the day, like, I used to have this stack of punch cards, but I'd hold them together with a rubber band and put them in this file cabinet, and that was my GitHub." And I mean, talk about how quickly the world changes, like, that's where he started his career, and he's still working today using GitHub.
Yeah.
But this is where he started, his GitHub was a file cabinet next to his desk.
I'm sure if we jumped in the DeLorean and went back into the 80s, 70s or 80s and found somebody that was very focused on process work, let's say process improvement, a consultant, we could pull them forward into the year 2025 and have them look at something, and they, with that process focused mindset and methods they had, regardless of whatever technology we were trying to integrate into or implement around it or enable by the process, they could sort that process part out, right? Because these are just best practices. And that's where, as a technologist, if you're listening to this and you're in this field, just keep in mind that this stuff changes so fast and everything's moving around. But these things, in terms of like we talked about today, preparation for how do you conduct yourself in a meeting, how do you prepare for discussions, all those things will hold true regardless of what's going on with the technology.
Yeah. Yeah, the technology is gonna change, the names are gonna change. You go back 15 or 20 years, and, waterfall project management was all anybody did. And today, that's almost like a four-letter word. Um,
Yeah.
well, it became that way for a while because Scrum and Agile took over everything, and now in some instances, people are looking at that like it's, the dark ages. Um, you're
Yep.
right, like, this all changes so fast, and you have to stay flexible, and you have to constantly strive to learn new things, and
Yes.
just to continue upgrading yourself. Um, because if you wanna stand still and never get better and never improve, then, like, the world's gonna pass you by.